When Minnesota police stepped into a house in suburban Wilmar on the afternoon of July 29, 2013, they had no idea they were about to walk into one of the most horrific family betrayal cases in state history. A 79-year-old woman, weighing barely over 100 pounds, had been brutally murdered in the basement of her own home. But what shocked the entire city wasn't the brutal method of the crime. It was the identity of the mastermind, her own grandson, whom she had taken in and raised when he was abandoned by his father. So what turned a 17-year-old teenager into someone who planned to kill the person he loved most? And why did he wait 7 whole months to carry out this bloody conspiracy? Welcome to the Case Files, where we unveil real cases, shocking crimes, and the dark secrets hidden behind the ordinary facade of everyday life. Today, we're diving deep into a case that makes even the most seasoned investigators shudder, not because of the brutality of the act, but because of the ultimate betrayal from within the family itself. In this episode, we're taking a deep dive into the infamous case of grandmother Lila Warwick and the deadly circle of ambition, the Wilmar Case, 2013. Chapter 1. The Woman with a Heart of Gold. To understand the cruelty of this case, we first need to know who Lila Warwick was. Born in 1934, Lila grew up on a family farm in rural Minnesota. She was a petite woman, standing only 5'3" and weighing about 110 pounds, but her heart was immeasurably large. Her piercing blue eyes always lit up when she saw her loved ones, especially her grandchildren. At 19, Lila met Robert, the love of her life, and they married almost immediately. In 1969, their small family, along with their 2 children, Sherry and Ken, moved to Wilmar, Minnesota, where they planned to build a peaceful life. But happiness didn't last forever. After 17 years together, Robert suddenly passed away from a heart attack at age 44. This shock was like an earthquake that devastated their family, especially Ken, the son who couldn't overcome the pain of losing his father. Ken became unstable, struggled to fit in, and after graduating high school, he left home and cut off contact with his family for many years. Despite losing her husband and son, Lila didn't let grief defeat her. She found solace in her Christian faith, becoming an active volunteer at the local Lutheran church for 40 years. She worked with preschool children, sang in the choir, and her door was always open to anyone who needed help. Lila's greatest joy was caring for her grandchildren, the kids who brought new light into her life. She attended their birthdays, gave them gifts, came to their school events, and never missed Christmas. Chapter 2. The Unexpected Return and Fatal Kindness. One day, after years of absence, Ken suddenly reappeared, bringing along his new wife, Jennifer, and 3 children, Ran, Robbie, and Ryan. The family was extremely surprised, but also happy to have the lost son return. However, the joy didn't last long. Less than a few weeks later, Ken disappeared again without a trace, leaving Jennifer and the 3 children in confusion. And this is where Lila's generous heart showed itself once more. She didn't hesitate for a second before inviting her former daughter-in-law and grandchildren to move in with her at her house in suburban Wilmar. In the following years, Jennifer and her children enjoyed a peaceful life with her. They celebrated Thanksgiving together, baked Christmas cookies, held birthdays, and enjoyed the warm family atmosphere. Lila especially loved Robbie, the grandson she considered her own son. But no one knew that this very kindness and trust would become the reason Lila would pay with her life. Chapter 3. The Seeds of Crime. When Greed Takes Root. Around December 2012, when Robbie Warwick was 17, a sinister thought began forming in his mind. He realized his grandmother had a large life insurance policy, and in the safe in the first-floor bedroom, there was a lot of money. Robbie began associating with Brock Junkermeyer, a 19-year-old with a criminal record. Junkermeyer regularly hung out with younger teenagers, and Robbie saw him as the right person for the dark plan forming in his head. Initially, Robbie told Junkermeyer they just needed to scare his grandmother to get money. But gradually, as the plan was discussed further, Robbie said bluntly, they needed to kill her to get all the assets, including the insurance money. For 7 months, from December 2012 to July 2013, the two plotted in detail. Robbie provided Junkermeyer with all the necessary information: the house layout, Lila's daily routine, the location of the spare key hidden under the gutter on the side of the house. They even pulled in Devin James Jenkins, a 16-year-old, into the plan to act as the lookout. Did Robbie ever hesitate or waver during those 7 months about betraying the person who raised him? Or had greed completely strangled all family feelings? Chapter 4. The Fateful Night, July 29, 2013. In the early morning of July 29, 2013, around 3:30 a.m., the plan was put into action. Brock Junkermeyer, holding a curved 20-inch knife that looked like a short sword, snuck into the house through the garage door. He used the very spare key that Robbie had stolen and given him beforehand. Meanwhile, Devin Jenkins sat in a blue sedan parked in front of the house, playing the role of lookout. After getting inside, Junkermeyer didn't rush. He went down to the basement and hid in the darkness, waiting. Over 2 hours passed in terrifying silence. He stood there, in the dark, with the knife in his hand, waiting for the unsuspecting victim to appear. Around 6 a.m., Lila Warwick, the 79-year-old woman, 5'3", tall, weighing barely 110 pounds, came down to the garage as was her daily routine. She had no idea that death was lurking in the shadows. When Junkermeyer stepped out, Lila screamed in terror and tried to run. But with the strength of a 19-year-old against an almost 80-year-old woman, the escape didn't last long. He caught up with her, using the knife to cut her hand, causing blood to pour out profusely. Chapter 5. The Final Terrifying Minutes. Junkermeyer dragged Lila from the garage into the house, leaving a trail of blood along the way. He forced her to the room with the computer and ordered, "Log into your bank account." With trembling hands from fear and pain, Lila complied. Blood from the wound on her hand dripped onto the computer mouse, keyboard, and mouse pad. On the screen, the bank login page appeared, showing the account balance. "Write me a check," Junkermeyer commanded. Lila picked up a pen, her hand shaking as she wrote out the first check. But because there was so much blood, the check got blood-stained and couldn't be used. He threw it away and forced her to write a second one, for $1,500. In the final moments of her life, Lila, a woman who had dedicated her entire life to Christian faith, looked into the eyes of the killer and said, "God can help you. Please stop." But Junkermeyer, with cold eyes, replied, "God can't help anything." And then he began an act of brutality beyond imagination. Junkermeyer strangled Lila with his hands for a full 20 minutes. After that, he broke her neck. But still not sure she was dead, he used the knife to stab her 6, 7 times. Blood poured out everywhere. Finally, he threw her body down to the basement, like an inanimate object. This entire process occurred while Robbie Warwick, the grandson Lila loved, was somewhere in the city, perhaps sleeping soundly in his warm bed, waiting for news of the death of the grandmother who had taken him in. Chapter 6. After the crime was completed. After murdering Lila, Junkermeyer didn't rush to leave. He went back to the first-floor bedroom, found the safe Robbie had told him about. He dragged the heavy safe out of the house, leaving marks on the carpet. Then, Junkermeyer called Robbie, and the two returned to the scene to pry open the safe. But the result was ironic. Inside wasn't the pile of money they imagined, just some documents and personal papers. All that Junkermeyer got from this brutal murder was a $500 check. A human life was taken for just $500, not even the price of a high-end cell phone. A few days later, Junkermeyer calmly went to Bremer Bank, deposited the check, and withdrew the money. Security cameras recorded his entire action, but at that time, the case hadn't been discovered yet. And the scariest part, Junkermeyer started bragging about his crime. He told friends with a proud tone, even led them past the victim's house and pointed at it, saying bluntly, "I killed her." He described in detail how he snuck into the house at 3:30 a.m., how he hid in the basement waiting, how Lila begged, and how he coldly refused mercy. Did Junkermeyer feel remorse? Or did he feel proud for having completed the mission? Chapter 7. Discovery of the crime. On July 29, 2013, when Lila didn't show up at the Lutheran church meeting, where she had been devoted for 40 years, people began to worry. She also didn't answer the phone when asked to pick up her granddaughter from school. Police were called to check. When they arrived, they saw Lila's car still in the garage, but all windows and doors were locked tight from the inside. Unable to get in, an officer looked through the phone book and contacted Jennifer, Lila's former daughter-in-law. But she was at work. Finally, they called Robbie Warwick, the 17-year-old grandson. And this is where the act of hypocrisy began. Robbie answered the phone, appeared worried and cooperative, providing the garage door code to the police. What was going through his mind at that moment? Was he feeling satisfied that the plan was about to be completed? When police entered, they immediately discovered a small blood stain on the garage floor. The blood trail led them down to the basement, where they found Lila deceased, still dressed but without shoes. The scene was horrifying. Blood splattered everywhere, from the garage to the kitchen, then continuing to the computer room. On the computer screen, the bank login page was still open. The computer mouse, mouse pad, keyboard, all had blood on them. On the floor was the blood-stained check that Lila was forced to write in her final moments. But strangely, there were no signs of forced entry or broken locks. This indicated that the perpetrator either had Lila open the door herself or had their own key. A neighbor revealed that Lila usually kept a spare key on a nail under the gutter. Police found the nail, but the key was gone. Chapter 8. The fateful testimony and truth. Gradually revealed. Initially, investigators were confused about the motive. A kind-hearted woman like Lila, who would want to harm her. The autopsy showed she had been restrained, strangled, her neck broken, and stabbed multiple times. When taking statements from the family, an unexpected detail emerged. Cherry Ekbaum, Lila's daughter, told police she suspected Robbie. Although he used to be very close to his grandmother, Robbie had become distant over the past 2 years, especially after he started having problems with drugs. But when interrogating Robbie, he had a solid alibi. He had been at work from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the school as a custodian. His manager confirmed Robbie was present the entire time. The case seemed to hit a dead end. But then, a phone call changed everything. A young man named Juker called the police station, saying he had important information. He said Brock Junkermeyer, a guy with a criminal record and friend of Robbie's, had openly admitted to him about killing Lila. Junkermeyer even led him past the victim's house and pointed at it, saying, "I killed her." Juker described in detail what Junkermeyer told him, from sneaking into the house at 3:30 a.m., hiding in the basement waiting, to how Lila begged and prayed to God for help. These details were too accurate. Only the perpetrator would know them. A few days later, even more important evidence emerged. Another friend of Junkermeyer's had secretly recorded his confession on a cell phone and brought it to police. In the recording, Junkermeyer clearly described how he entered the house through the garage, how Lila pleaded, and his cold response, "God can't help anything." Right after that, Bremer Bank called to report that someone had withdrawn money from Lila's account using a check. Police checked the surveillance video and confirmed it was Brock Junkermeyer who deposited the $1,500 check on the very day Lila was killed. The evidence was irrefutable. An arrest warrant was issued. Chapter 9. The Cold Confession. When summoned for questioning, Junkermeyer initially tried to deny it, but when confronted with the audio recording, bank video, and testimony from multiple witnesses, he sighed, paused for a few seconds, and said coldly, "All right, I killed her. I killed Lila." And then, during 4 hours of interview, Junkermeyer recounted every detail in a tone as if describing routine work. How he snuck into the house at 3:30 a.m. with the spare key. How he hid in the basement waiting for over 2 hours. How Lila discovered him and screamed in terror. How he caught up with her and cut her hand. How he forced her to log into the bank and write a check. How the first check got blood-stained. How she begged and prayed to God. How he refused and strangled her for 20 minutes. How he broke her neck. How he stabbed her 6, 7 times because he wasn't sure she was dead. How he threw her body down to the basement like an inanimate object. No signs of remorse, no tears, only chilling coldness. But what made the entire interrogation room shudder wasn't Junkermeyer's statement, but what he revealed next. "Who told you to get into the house?" the investigator asked. "Robbie. Robbie gave me the key," Junkermeyer answered. "Who planned it?" the investigator continued. "Robbie Warwick. He said his grandmother had a lot of money. At first, he just said to scare her. But then, he said we had to kill her to get all the assets, including the insurance." The room fell silent. The 17-year-old grandson, the person Lila took in when abandoned by his father, the person she loved like her own son, was the mastermind behind this brutal murder. Junkermeyer also said that after the murder, Robbie returned to the scene with him, took the safe, and together they pried it open. When they discovered there wasn't a pile of money as imagined, they burned most of the documents, only keeping the $1,500 check. Finally, Junkermeyer led police to an area in East Vilmar, where he had dumped the murder weapon, blood-stained shoes, and partially burned documents with Lila's name on them. Chapter 10. Justice Served. Brock Junkermeyer was arrested and charged with first-degree premeditated murder. The trial began in March 2014, and after 4 tense days of trial on April 9, 2014, Junkermeyer suddenly changed his plea from not guilty to guilty. His attorney, Kent Marshall, explained that this decision was made to spare the victim's family from having to hear the horrific details again in court. A psychological expert had found that Junkermeyer suffered from multiple mental disorders, including autism, Asperger's syndrome, and antisocial behavior. Marshall also said Junkermeyer had been bullied at school. However, no mental illness defense was accepted. Judge Donald Spilseth delivered the sentence: life in prison without parole. Robert Innocencio Warwick, the grandson, Mastermind, was also initially charged with first-degree premeditated murder. On June 25, 2014, Robbie agreed to plead guilty in a plea deal. On July 1, 2014, he was convicted of first-degree murder while committing a felony and received a sentence of life in prison. The charge of premeditated first-degree murder was dropped in the agreement. According to Minnesota Department of Corrections records, Robert Warwick was born on October 29, 1995, and is still serving his sentence. Devin James Jenkins, the 16-year-old who acted as lookout, pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting second-degree unintentional murder in January 2014. As a minor, Jenkins was given rehabilitation programs, 100 hours of community service annually, and probation until age 21. Chapter 11. Extraordinary Forgiveness. But what brought tears to the entire courtroom wasn't the sentence, it was what the victim's family demonstrated. Sherry Ekbom, Lila's daughter, along with 2 granddaughters, read victim impact statements in court. In them, they expressed no hatred or desire for revenge. Sherry said, "Despite all the horrible and horrifying things I've heard and witnessed, I hold no hatred. Revenge with hatred and repaying evil with evil. She wouldn't do that, and neither will I. Through this, I will honor her." Katie Ekbom, 22, Lila's granddaughter, even did something no one expected. After the trial, she gave Junkermeyer's father a spiritual book with a note. "Honestly, his family is suffering too. I just had to reach out." Both prosecutor Matthew Frank and defense attorney Kent Marshall expressed amazement at this grace. Marshall, with 35 years of experience, said, "I have never, in my 35-year career, witnessed the grace and generosity displayed here. It's unbelievable, commendable, and it's not something I could do." This is the final legacy Lila left behind. Not assets, not money, but values of kindness, forgiveness, and unconditional love. The Lila Warwick case isn't just a simple crime. It's a profound moral tragedy about family betrayal, bottomless greed, and the price paid when character deteriorates. A 79-year-old woman, barely 5 stones, tall, weighing 110 pounds, who dedicated her entire life to faith, family, and community, had to die in pain and terror at the hands of the very grandson she loved like a son. She didn't die from illness, didn't die from old age, but died because of the greed of those willing to sell their souls just for $500. Brock Junkermeyer, the cold-blooded killer, is now serving a life sentence without parole in a Minnesota prison. Every day he wakes up in a cramped cell, sees gray walls, and knows that's all he'll see until he dies. Robert Warwick, the traitorous grandson, is also serving life in prison. He lost the chance to live a normal life, lost his future, lost everything, just because of short-term greed and sinful choices. But the question remains, where did society fail? How could a 17-year-old plan a murder for 7 months without anyone noticing? How could a 19-year-old kill a 79-year-old woman so brutally? And how could they live normally, even brag about the crime, without feeling any remorse? These are questions we, as a society, need to ask ourselves. The Lila Warwick case reminds us that the most painful betrayal doesn't come from enemies, but from the very people we love. And sometimes, kindness isn't repaid with gratitude, but with unimaginable cruelty. However, amid the darkness of crime, there's still a ray of humanity, the forgiveness from Lila Warwick's family. They chose not to let hatred control their lives, but to preserve the values Lila taught: love, selflessness, and grace. That is the greatest legacy Lila Warwick left for this world. If this case makes you reflect, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss other shocking cases. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think forgiveness like the Warwick family showed is the right thing to do? Or does true justice only come when betrayers pay the price for life? And don't forget, in life, cherish those who love you, because sometimes we only realize their value when it's too late. Thank you for following the case files. See you in the next episode.